Okay, hello and welcome everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started because it is 1 p.m. on the dot. My name is Jen, and today we're going to be talking about the donations, reports, lists, and labels. And this includes the list of account balances, listing giver numbers, and labels. If you have our workbooks, this is in D106. And there was a typo on the final page number, so if you're looking at that, it is 27 through the end of the book. Sorry about that little typo, but yeah, if you're following along in that workbook, you're going to start on page 27. All right, and I believe that's all we need to cover before we get started. So without further ado, let's dive on in. So if we open up our donations module and we come up here to our reports and export up at the top, then we have several different categories of reports that we can work with, and today we're going to be working exclusively with these lists and labels options. So first we have list account balances. And in the list account balances, the first thing we have to select is the year. And we can print the report for an entire year or just selected groupings of months or even just a single month if we change it to January through January. We'll go ahead and leave for now, include inactive accounts and include accounts with zero balances. Now, both of those could be unchecked. A lot of times you probably aren't going to need those two options. But just for our first little look at the preview here, we're going to leave those checked. And I'm having a little trouble here with my print preview, so bear with me just one sec. There we go. Okay, so you can see it's breaking up our account balances into the funds that we have set up. So if you scroll through, you'll see we do have in our system a lot of zero balance accounts. So if I close this and I uncheck include accounts with zero balance and then click print, we're going to get a much smaller list, and that's probably going to be what you want to do the majority of the time. And we can also probably most of the time uncheck inactive accounts as well. If we look at that print preview, you can see that pulled a couple off as well. And down at the bottom of the report, you'll see it's really nice. We get a date range, a year, and a count of how many accounts we're looking at. So moving on to the additional tabs, we have our columns tab here where we can add a lot more information than just the account and the year-to-date balance. The account lists both the ID and the name. You also have these other two account choices down here where you could show just the name or just the ID if you prefer that. Teresa, you're asking about reports that are membership, not donations. So that question is not related to today's topic. So here on the columns tab, we can add these additional columns such as the period activity, which would be different from the year-to-date balance if we were looking at let's say, for example, we'll look back at last year and we will look at the second quarter. Let's say, let's do April through, I'm just going to do February actually, so we can compare what February would be to January so that we get the okay, Teresa, accounting is not donations, so those are accounting reports that you're asking about. So we're doing donation reports today. The adding that period activity shows you what happened in just that month. So it looks like in our demo data, we didn't have any period activity for the past February. But let's switch back to 2018 and let's look at just this month and see if we've got anything in there for 2018. Yeah, so there's a bit of period activity, but then there's also year-to-date balance. All right, so we'll close that and look at some of these other columns. Now the comments, that would just add any comments that you have. And then inactive shows whether or not the account was inactive. And then below that, pledge account indicates whether or not you pledged to it. And then below that, tax DED means tax deductible. And then below that is print statements. And that indicates whether or not the account would be printed on a statement. Then below that, again, the account ID would be just the number. And then next we can move on to the Sort tab. The Sort tab sorts automatically by account. That is in ascending order based on the account ID first. And we can click in this drop down and we can change that to just account ID or account name, and we can also sort by any of the other columns. It's probably not necessarily helpful to sort by comments, but some of these other ones might give you some more information that you wanted. For example, we could do in year-to-date balance order if we wanted to see the accounts ranked monetarily. And so that puts our lowest account balance at the top and our highest one at the bottom in each of these fund sections. And then on the Detail tab, we can choose whether or not we want to hide certain accounts and balances and subtotals based on the way that that is set up in the Accounts and Pledges area. And then the last tab you have is Fonts, and this allows you to change the font size if you'd like to do that. So that covers just about everything on our list account balances. You can also export this report. When you press that export button, you can either send it via email with any of these file types, and that would allow you to send it through Outlook or another service on your computer. And then you can export it straight to your computer as any of these file types as well. All right, next let's take a look at our list of giver numbers. Now, just to remind everyone, you don't necessarily have to work with giver numbers unless you're actually giving out boxes of envelopes. Since a lot of churches are moving away from that, a lot of churches are no longer using giver numbers, and that is just fine. Whatever is going to be most convenient for you guys. So we have two different ways of running the list giver numbers. We can run it with all of our assigned numbers, or we can run it for unassigned numbers. And we can run it for any date we would like. So if I want to see what the numbers were in 2014, I could do that, or I can just look at the numbers as of today. If I'm going to do that, I have a few additional options as well. I can include the person's next giver number if they have a future number assigned. And I can also include the address and phone number if I'd like. I'm not going to include the next giver number because it's still the mid to beginning of the year, so we don't have next year's numbers assigned yet. So I'll go ahead and print this looking at it with these settings as basic as possible. And that shows just the list of the names of the givers and what their numbers are. You can see if I've got folks giving as a family, it says Mr. and Mrs. instead of just a first name. I can also use this number of columns here to take up less pages and put 2 columns of names on one page. So that's nice and helpful as well. I'm going to take that back to 1 for now. And let's go to the Givers tab. Now this tab is covered in greater detail in the membership reporting. It's the same as the People tab in membership reporting. So we're going to skip over this tab for now. It does allow you to select any membership criteria. So if you only wanted to see giver numbers for people with a particular status code or something like that, you could do that on the Givers tab here. Then we have a Columns tab, just like in the other reports. And we can choose to include the next start date and the current end date if we'd like. So the current end date would be if their current number is going to end on a specific day, and the start date is if they have a new number that's starting on a specific day as well. Because this is a small list of information, we can only sort by their current or their next giver number or by their name. So you can sort by the number if you'd prefer, and we could also put the number in the first column. So let's take a look at what that looks like. That gives us our numbers and then our names. Instead of putting the names in alphabetical order, we've got it in numerical order. And then again, we have a Fonts tab. And then this Additional Options tab allows us to include member indicators and visitor indicators. So if I check those, then you can see my folks who are visitors get V's next to their names, and my folks who are donors get D's next to their names. Those are the folks that are only in the donations module. And then let's take a look at the unassigned numbers list. So I'm going to say I want my unassigned numbers from 1 to 1,000, because why not? And then let's click print. And then I'm just going to get a lot of columns of all the numbers that are available. And it squeezes in as many as it's able to fit, so that's why it doesn't let you choose down here. Now, the last thing I want to point out on this first options tab is we can show just a range of giver numbers. So if I only wanted to see maybe the first 50 numbers, I could do that. And then that gives me just a smaller portion. You can also set up named ranges. For example, 200 through 250 might be your children's envelope numbers. And so you could use the Add button to add a named range if you'd like to do that. And then that saves you some clicking around later on. And here we have all of our children's numbers. All right, last but not least, we're going to show our labels. So here on our labels, even though we're in donations, it's starting us out on our People tab. We can, like I mentioned, use a status code or any of the membership characteristic fields to sort, or rather to filter the people that we are going to print labels for. Now this step 1, as it says across the top here, select who should have labels printed. So here we're just selecting who's going to be included, not what the labels are going to look like. That happens in step 2. So if we go to the Giving Pledging tab, we could say we only want to print labels for people who gave. So we can use that only those who gave option. And then we can go to the Accounts tab if we wanted to see only people who gave to the general fund, for example. And then finally we have the Sort tab, and this will put them in the order that we'd like. So this is going to sort them in giver number order and then alphabetical order. If I click Reset Sort, that would take it back to the defaults, which these are the defaults. So that is that is what the default is set to, but you can change it to any that you'd like, such as name instead of number. When we click next, this is where we determine what the labels actually look like. And here you will find two types of labels that say template next to them. Those two come with church windows, and any additional that have been added will just say the name that you've given them. So the two templates are the Avery 5160 with family mailing label and the Avery 5160 with individual names. And I'll show you the difference between those two. So below that template selection area, you have a choice of whether you want to print one label per person, which means per individual, one label per giving unit, so that means if people give together, they would get one label to share, or per family, that would mean the entire family gets one label. So for starting us out here, I'm going to choose family and click print. And this gives me a short list of labels for those who are giving in the year so far, and it's showing them grouped as families. And it's showing it with their family information. So then, if we change it to the Avery 5160 template with individual names and click print, then you can see instead of saying Mr. and Mrs. so-and-so, it's got their names separated by commas. For example, here we have Bill, comma, Donna, Bell, and Evan, comma, Nikki, Bernard. So that is the two label templates that come with church windows. If you want to make any changes to those, you can use the Edit Label button. Now, if we switch this one label per from family to individual, then we'll get more labels than we did before, because there'll be one label for each separate person, and it'll say each of their separate names. Let me just get that pulled up. All right, so that you can see now this is going on to a second page. Now, the most important thing about the label layout and the one label per items is that if we choose one label per individual, but we use the family mailing label, it's going to look like we have duplicates because it's making one label. Here you can see in this first column for Mr. and Mrs. William Bell, there are two that say Mr. and Mrs. William Bell because one is for Mr. and the other is for Mrs. And the same thing you can see here with the Bernards. There's one for each of them. So that is how the two kind of compare to each other. You have the label layout that does what the actual label looks like, whether it says Mr. and Mrs. or the names with commas, and then you have the one label per, which is how many labels. So if we go back into this template and we want to add an additional field, we can click Edit Label. And this takes a second or two to come up here. This is our label designer. So here in the label designer, you can move this box up or down if you need to add extra information, such as a giver number or a phone number. For example, I moved it down and I can come over here to the data controls and I can grab giver number and drag it over just above the mailing label and address. And then if I click Save As, I'm going to just take out the word template and add giver number and click OK. Then when I exit out and I click Print, I will get labels with the giver number as well as the name and address. I'm having some issues with my print preview here again. Give me just a sec. There we are. You can see that number has been added. Now we had a question about printing the labels from left to right instead of up and down, and that can also be done in our Edit Label area. If I grab that template again and click Edit, we can click on the detail up here and click this little arrow for the detail tasks and change the multi-column layout to across and then down instead of down and then across. And then we can close and save this as a across instead of down. And it'll show here on the second page how that worked. Before it was down this left column and now it's going across the page. All right, and we had a question about showing the list for the current year pledges. That would be in step 1. If I click back and I go to giving and pledging, I can say giving is all and pledging is only those who pledged. So that would be how I select only my pledgers in this current date range. And then we had another question about centering the information on the labels. If I come back into my Edit Label template, just a sec here. And it's given me fits on the label designer, just a sec. I'm sorry, folks. Just one moment here. I think I'm going to have to close that for a minute. So I apologize. We have hit, obviously, the 20-minute mark. So we have covered everything as far as the lists and labels go. I'm just getting to questions at this point. And I'm just going to close this report designer real quick. Thank you for your patience. Gotta get this straightened out there. All right. Okay. Thank you again for your patience. Let's get back in here to our labels. So if I grab one of these templates that we've been working with already, there we are. To make any changes to the font, Mary, you come up here once you've clicked on the box. If you don't have the box clicked, it's not going to do anything if you click any of these font buttons, but you'll see if you click that box and then you click the center right up here, it'll center that for you. You can also change the font, like we could do Arial. So let's save that and take a peek. That gives us, whoops, of course I've got to select one of my 1 per options. Oh, and my print preview is hiding again. There we are. So that is how we can change the font, both the positioning and the font style. All right, so are there any other questions before we close the webinar for the day? I want to thank you all for attending. And definitely check back in for the future webinars and the recordings of the webinars, which are always available in the support section of our website. Thank you again, and I'll just stick around for a few more minutes in case anyone has any questions. Thank you for your patience with the small little glitches we had with those previews coming up and that report designer. All of that is just glitching because of the GoToWebinar interface. You shouldn't have any of those issues on your own system. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other questions in, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my screen off, I think. Christy is asking if the members' names can be bolded. You can bold the names in the text. If you wanted just the names bold instead of the name and address, it would take a little bit more finagling in that report designer. But it is possible. If you wanted to do that, you can give us a call and we could help you set that up. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you again, you guys. I'm going to go ahead and close my screen. Teresa, you could download and install a trial version of version 20. It would just be the regular trial version. So when you're running the installation of Church Windows, you have several options. You have standalone or server, you have workstation, and then you have trial with blank data and trial with sample data. So you could install a trial with sample data of version 20 on a computer before you actually update your real data. So that would be an option for you, Teresa. You would have to install it as a separate installation. It would probably be safest to do that on a separate computer. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the room. Thank you again, everyone. Have a good day.